Obinna Okafor disowned his pregnant daughter and cast her into the streets, ignoring every plea for mercy. 3 years later, when Amara returned with her child, she brought with her a revelation so devastating it would destroy what little remained of her father's broken world. What shocking secret did Amara carry? And why did it connect directly to the very catastrophe that had already ruined Obinna? In the bustling community of Enugu's Merchant District, where success was measured in land deeds and ceremonial titles, Obinna Okafor stood as a monument to achievement. His compound, with its towering gates and imported tiles, announced his status before he ever spoke a word. And at the center of his pride stood Amara, brilliant, obedient, the daughter who would cement the Okafor legacy through an advantageous marriage. But on a humid afternoon that should have been ordinary, everything changed. Amara had been feeling ill for weeks, her mother Ebo growing increasingly concerned. When the family doctor arrived and performed his examination, the silence in the consultation room became suffocating. "Mr. Okafor," the doctor finally said, his voice careful and measured, "your daughter is expecting a child. Approximately 8 weeks along." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Obinna's world, so carefully constructed over decades, began to crack from the very foundation. The slap came so hard it knocked Amara to the floor. "Get out." Obinna's voice shook the consultation room, his hand still raised, trembling with a rage that had turned his face to stone. "Get out of my house. Out of my sight." Amara tasted blood. Through blood vision, she saw her mother frozen in the doorway, hands covering her mouth, tears streaming down her face but making no sound. Ebo had learned long ago that Obinna's fury was a storm that destroyed everything in its path, even those who tried to calm it. "Papa, please," Amara's voice cracked. "You are no longer my daughter." The words came cold, final. "Whatever you were carrying in your womb, you will carry alone. My name, my roof, my protection, you have lost them all. If you would just let me explain." "Explain." Obinna laughed, a bitter sound that held no humor. "Explain how you have destroyed everything I built. How you have shamed the Okafor name in front of the entire community." "There is nothing to explain. You are dead to me." Within the hour, Amara stood outside the compound gates with a single bag. Her mother had pressed it into her hands in those final moments, along with a whispered prayer and what little money she could hide from Obinna's sight. Then the gates had closed, and the only home Amara had ever known became a fortress against her. The Merchant District watched her fall with hungry eyes. She hadn't walked 2 streets when the man appeared, thin, smiling, dressed in clothes that tried too hard to look expensive. He matched her pace with the confidence of a jackal who had spotted wounded prey. "Sister, you look lost. I can help you." Amara kept walking, but his presence pressed against her like heat. "I have rooms. Clean rooms. You can stay there, work small jobs. A girl in your condition needs protection, not so." She stopped, turned to face him. His smile widened. "Who is the father?" he asked, stepping closer. "Maybe I know him. Maybe we can arrange something." "He is the one man my father cannot forgive," Amara said, her voice quiet but unyielding. "That is all anyone needs to know." Something in her tone made him hesitate. She walked past him into the gathering dusk, alone. The rain found Amara on her 3rd night in the streets, hungry and shivering beneath a rusted kiosk. She had wandered far from the Merchant District, into neighborhoods where Obinna's name held no weight and survival was measured in single days. "Child, you will catch your death out here." The voice belonged to a woman who emerged from the downpour like an answer to unspoken prayers. She was older, wrapped in layers despite the heat, her face kind in the flickering light of a nearby generator. "Come. I have a place. You can rest." Amara hesitated, remembering the Jackoman with his false promises. But the rain was relentless, and her body ached with exhaustion that went deeper than bone. "My name is Mama Udu," the woman said, extending her hand. "I help girls like you. No judgment. No shame. Just shelter." The compound sat at the end of a narrow alley, hidden behind high walls that blocked out the city's noise. Inside, other girls moved through dimly lit corridors, some pregnant like Amara, others nursing infants, all wearing the same hollow expression of those who had run out of choices. Mama Udu's kindness came with conditions Amara only understood gradually. The girls who stayed worked, cleaning, cooking, caring for the children of women who could pay. But there were other tasks too, whispered about in corners, girls who left at night and returned before dawn with cash that went straight into Mama Udu's hands. You don't have to do anything you don't want, Mama Udu assured her, though the implication hung heavy in the air. But everyone contributes. That's how we survive here. Amara kept her head down and her hands busy. She scrubbed floors until her knuckles bled, took on the heaviest chores, made herself useful enough that Mama Udu never pressed her toward the darker work. The months crawled past in that shadowed place. When her time came, it was another girl who held her hand through the pain, a teenager named Chisholm whose eyes had seen too much. The birth happened in a back room with only a local nurse and Mama Udu present, the older woman's face unreadable as she watched. The baby's first cry cut through the darkness like light. A boy, Mama Udu announced, placing the infant in Amara's arms. Amara looked down at her son's face and felt something shift inside her chest, a fierce, desperate love that burned away the fog of survival. She touched his tiny fingers, counted each perfect nail. Kamsi, she whispered. His name is Kamsi. In that moment, holding her son in a place that traded in broken dreams, Amara made a silent vow. Whatever it took, she would find a way out. Kamsi was 3 weeks old when Amara had the conversation that shattered her fragile sense of safety. She had reason to feed him in the dead hours of night, moving quietly through the compound's corridors toward the kitchen for water. Mama Udu's voice stopped her before she reached the doorway, low, businesslike, speaking to someone Amara couldn't see. The boy is healthy. Good weight. Fair skin like his mother. These things matter to the buyers. Amara's blood turned to ice. How much? A man's voice, unfamiliar, calculating. 40,000. Not a kobo less. He's barely a month old, fresh. No complications. The mother won't be a problem. And if she makes noise, she has nowhere to go, no one to run to. Girls like her understand reality eventually. Mama Udu's laugh was soft, almost gentle. Besides, I'll tell her the baby died. Fever. It happens all the time in places like this. She'll grieve, but she'll survive. The man grunted approval. I'll bring the money tomorrow night. Have him ready. Amara backed away from the door, her heart hammering so violently she feared they would hear it. She clutched Kamsi tighter, his small body warm against her chest, oblivious to the terror flooding through her veins. Back in her corner of the shared room, she waited. The other girls slept deeply, exhausted from their daily labors. Chisholm's breathing was steady in the darkness, peaceful in a way that made Amara's chest ache. She couldn't warn them. Couldn't risk anyone alerting Mama Udu. When the compound finally fell into its deepest silence, around 3 in the morning, Amara moved. She wrapped Kamsi in the only blanket she had, stuffed her few possessions into a plastic bag, and crept toward the back entrance, a rusted door the girls used to throw out wash water. Her hands shook as she walked the boat, the metal scraping loud enough to wake the dead. She froze, listening. No movement. No voices. The door opened. The alley beyond was pitch black, filled with the smell of rot and standing water. Amara didn't care. She stepped into the darkness, pulling the door shut behind her, and ran. Kamsi stirred against her chest, making small sounds of protest. She pressed him closer, whispering prayers into his downy hair as her bare feet splashed through puddles and her lungs burned with effort. Behind her, Mama Udu's compound faded into the labyrinth of Enugu's forgotten streets. Ahead lay only uncertainty and the terrifying freedom of having nothing left to lose. 5 days of running had stripped Amara down to nothing but survival and desperation. She had avoided the merchant district, stayed away from anywhere Mama Udu's network might reach. But Enugu was not kind to homeless mothers with infants. The money her mother had given her was long gone. Kamsi cried constantly now, hunger making him weak, and Amara's own body had begun to fail, her milk drying up, her vision blurring at the edges. On the 6th day, she collapsed outside a pharmacy in a neighborhood she didn't recognize. She came to with Kamsi still clutched against her chest and a bottle of water being pressed to her lips. The man kneeling beside her was older, perhaps 50, dressed in clothes that spoke of wealth without announcing it, simple but expensive, understated elegance. "Drink slowly," he said in English tinged with a West African accent that wasn't quite Nigerian. "You're severely dehydrated." Amara drank, her hands shaking so badly he had to steady the bottle. Around them, a small crowd had gathered, watching with the detached curiosity of people who had seen poverty too many times to be moved by it. "The baby needs formula," the man continued, his eyes assessing Kamsi with the practiced gaze of someone familiar with crisis. "When did he last eat?" "Yesterday morning." Amora's voice was barely a whisper. "I have no money." The man stood, spoke briefly to his driver, a silent figure who had materialized beside a black sedan, and within minutes returned with formula, bottled water, and bread. He watched as Amara fed Kamsi with trembling hands, the baby's desperate sucking filling the silence between them. "What's your name?" he asked finally. "Amara." "I'm Jabari Mensah." He paused, studying her face with an intensity that should have frightened her but somehow didn't. "You're educated. I can hear it in how you speak, see it in your eyes. How did you end up here?" The question hung between them, loaded with judgment she had learned to expect. But his face showed only curiosity. "Bad choices," Amara said quietly. "And worse circumstances." Jabari was silent for a long moment, then nodded as if she had confirmed something he already suspected. "I have a proposition. I need someone intelligent, discreet, and desperate enough to accept unusual terms. You need shelter and safety for your son?" He handed her a business card, simple, expensive cardstock with nothing but a name and phone number. "I'm offering you a job. Housing. Security. In exchange, you will ask no questions about my business and speak to no one about our arrangement. Complete discretion, absolute loyalty." His gaze hardened slightly. "Can you provide that?" Amara looked down at Kamsi, finally sleeping peacefully in her arms, his tiny face relaxed for the first time in days. "Yes," she whispered. "Whatever you need." 3 months after casting Amara into the streets, Obinna Okafor sat in his study nursing wounds that wealth could not heal. The shame had been relentless. Whispers followed him through the market, conversations died when he entered rooms, and the marriage alliance he had cultivated for years had dissolved overnight. The prestigious family wanted nothing to do with a man whose daughter had conceived a bastard child. His carefully constructed empire of respect had cracked, and he could feel it crumbling beneath his feet. When Kwame Bodu arrived at his compound, Obinna initially refused to see him. The Ghanaian businessman was persistent, returning 3 times before Ebo finally convinced her husband that rudeness would only fuel more gossip. Kwame entered the sitting room with the confidence of a man who had never known rejection, tall, impeccably dressed, speaking with an accent that made everything sound like wisdom. "Mr. Okafor, I've heard of your troubles," Kwame began, settling into the chair across from Obinna with practiced ease. "I've also heard of your business acumen. That's why I'm here." Obinna's pride bristled at the mention of his troubles, but curiosity kept him silent. "I represent a consortium of West African investors," Kwame continued, producing elegant documents from his leather briefcase. "We're developing telecommunications infrastructure across 6 countries. The returns are extraordinary, 300% within 18 months, guaranteed." He spread the papers across the table, impressive letterheads, complex financial projections, testimonials from businessmen whose names Obinna recognized. "Why come to me?" Obinna asked, suspicious despite the flutter of interest in his chest. "Because you're a man who understands opportunity. And because..." Kwame leaned forward, his voice dropping to a confidential tone, "You're a man who needs to remind this community of his power. What better way than to emerge from this unfortunate situation wealthier than ever?" The word struck something deep in Obinna's wounded pride. Yes. He would show them all. Show them that Obinna Okafor could not be broken by a daughter's disgrace. Over the following weeks, Kwame returned often, always with new projections, new testimonials, new promises. The investment required substantial capital, the kind that would demand selling properties, liquidating assets, leveraging everything Obinna had built over decades. Ebo watched with growing alarm as her husband became increasingly obsessed with Kwame's scheme. This man, Obinna, she ventured one evening, we know nothing about him. Perhaps we should. Perhaps you should leave business to men who understand it, Obinna snapped, his eyes still fixed on the glowing projection spread before him. 3 months after their first meeting, Obinna signed the final documents, transferring nearly everything he owned into Kwame Bodu's consortium. The Ghanaian smiled warmly, shook his hand with both of his own, and promised returns that would make the Okafor name legendary. Within a week, Kwame Bodu had vanished completely, and with him, Obinna's entire fortune. The realization came slowly, then all at once. First, the phone number stopped working, Kwame's mobile, his office line, the consortium's headquarters in Accra. Then the addresses revealed themselves as vacant lots or buildings that had never heard of any telecommunications venture. The testimonials, when Obinna finally investigated them properly, belonged to men who had never invested a single naira. Obinna sat in his study, surrounded by worthless papers, and understood with crushing clarity that he had been played for a fool. The bank confirmed what he already knew in his bones. The accounts were empty. The properties were gone, sold to facilitators who had vanished along with Kwame. Everything Obinna had built over 30 years of grinding work had evaporated like morning mist. The community that had once courted his favor now turned away with barely concealed satisfaction. Papa Jide, who had called Obinna's brother for 20 years, crossed the street to avoid him at the market. When Obinna finally cornered him outside the beer parlor, the older man's face was stern. "You cast out your own daughter without mercy," Papa Jide said quietly. "Now you know how it feels to be abandoned. Perhaps there is justice in this world after all." Uncle Kofi, who had borrowed money from Obinna countless times, refused to even answer his door when Obinna came seeking help. Through the window, Obinna could see him sitting inside, deliberately looking away. The compound that had once announced his status began to decay with shocking speed. Without money for maintenance, the imported tiles cracked, the gates rusted, the walls grew stained with mold. Creditors came daily, their patience exhausted, their threats escalating. The few servants who had remained left one by one, unpaid wages mounting like accusations. Ebo moved through the deteriorating house like a ghost, her silence more devastating than any reproach. She had warned him. She had begged him to reconsider. But Obinna's pride had been louder than her wisdom, and now they were both paying the price. At night, lying on a mattress they could no longer afford to replace, Obinna stared at the ceiling and thought of Amara. His perfect daughter, whom he had cast away without hesitation. He wondered where she was, whether she had survived, whether his grandchild had been born. The thoughts brought no comfort, only a hollow ache that grew deeper with each passing day. "We should try to find her," Ebo whispered one night, her voice barely audible in the darkness. "And offer her what?" Obinna's laugh was bitter. "A place in our ruin. She is better off wherever she is, away from the wreckage I have made of this family." But in the depths of his shame, a small, desperate part of him hoped his daughter was alive somewhere, thriving in ways he no longer could. 3 years had transformed Amara in ways that felt both miraculous and unsettling. Jabari's job had proven to be managing his complex network of business interests, legitimate enterprises that required intelligence, discretion, and a mind that could navigate gray areas without losing itself entirely. Amara had excelled. She lived in a comfortable apartment Jabari provided, Kamsi attended a good school, and she had built a professional reputation under a carefully constructed identity that bore no connection to the Okafor name. She had become someone her former self wouldn't recognize. The woman who called herself Auntie Clara entered Amara's life at a networking event in Lagos, all polished elegance and calculated charm. She was perhaps 45, draped in designer labels that whispered rather than shouted wealth, her smile warm but her eyes assessing everything with predatory precision. "I've been watching you," Clara said over champagne, as if this were a compliment rather than a threat. "You're wasted on Jabari's small operations. A woman with your talents could be making real money." Amara kept her expression neutral, a skill she had perfected over 3 years of working in shadows. "I'm satisfied with my current arrangement." "Satisfied?" Clara laughed softly. "That's the word people use when they are too afraid to reach for what they truly want." She leaned closer, her perfume expensive and cloying. I run a network that moves serious capital, international connections, offshore accounts, clients who pay premium prices for premium discretion. The implication was clear even before Clara continued. Young women, educated and refined, connecting with powerful men who value beauty and intelligence. The arrangements are temporary, lucrative, and entirely professional. Her smile never wavered. You could earn in 1 month what takes you a year with Jabari. More importantly, you could recruit others, girls who need opportunities, who are desperate enough to be grateful. Amara's stomach turned. She recognized this speech, had heard versions of it in Mama Udu's compound, in the streets, in every dark corner where desperation was harvested for profit. Think of your son, Clara pressed, misreading Amara's silence as consideration. Private schools, university abroad, a future without limitations. All you have to do is be smart about how you use what God gave you. And help other girls do the same. For a moment, Amara allowed herself to imagine it, the wealth, the security, the power to ensure Kamsi never wanted for anything. She thought of how far she had fallen, how much she had endured, how easy it would be to justify this next step as simply survival in a world that showed no mercy to women without protection. Then she thought of the girls in Mama Udu's compound, their hollow eyes, their stolen futures. No, Amara said quietly. I'm not interested. Clara's smile hardened. You're making a mistake. Opportunities like this don't come twice. Then I live with that mistake. Amara didn't tell Jabari about Clara's offer immediately. Instead, she did what 3 years of survival had taught her. She watched, she listened, and she waited for the pattern to reveal itself. Clara's operation was larger than Amara had initially suspected. Over the following weeks, she noticed the same polished woman at multiple events, always circling young professional women with a particular profile, educated, attractive, financially stretched, slightly desperate beneath their composed exteriors. Amara recognized the hunting technique because she had once been prey. She began documenting everything. Names, dates, locations where Clara conducted business. She followed the woman to an upscale hotel in Victoria Island where she maintained a permanent suite, watched as young women arrived looking hopeful and left looking hollow. It was during one of these observations that Amara noticed something that changed everything: a government official's car, distinctive plates announcing his position in the Ministry of Justice. He emerged from Clara's suite looking satisfied, straightening his tie with the casual arrogance of a man who believed himself untouchable. Amara finally brought her findings to Jabari. His office was sparse, functional, revealing nothing of the complex man who occupied it. He listened in silence as Amara laid out her discovery, his expression unreadable until she finished. You want to expose her, he said finally. Not a question. I want to stop her. There's a difference. Jabari studied her for a long moment. This isn't your fight, Amara. Clara has protection, connections that reach deep into places we cannot touch. She approached me. She made it my fight. Amara leaned forward. But more than that, those girls she's recruiting, they're desperate. They're me 3 years ago. If I can stop even one of them from ending up in that suite. Something shifted in Jabari's face. He opened a drawer, pulled out a slim folder, and slid it across the desk. I've known about Clara for 2 years, he said quietly. I've been waiting for the right moment, the right leverage. You may have just provided it. The folder contained evidence far more damning than anything Amara had gathered: financial records, encrypted communications, a network that stretched across West Africa. But the key was the government official, a man whose anti-trafficking rhetoric had made him a darling of international donors. The hypocrisy alone would destroy him, Jabari continued. And without his protection, Clara's entire operation collapses. They moved carefully, methodically. Jabari's contacts in the media received anonymous packages, documents, photographs, testimonials from girls willing to speak if their identities were protected. The story broke on a Thursday morning, spreading across social media before Clara could contain it. By Friday afternoon, the government official had resigned. By Saturday, Clara was in custody, her assets frozen, her network in chaos. Amara watched the news coverage from her apartment, Kamsi playing at her feet, and felt something she hadn't experienced in 3 years, not just survival, but victory. The black Mercedes arrived in the merchant district on a Tuesday afternoon, its polished exterior reflecting a prosperity the neighborhood had nearly forgotten. Amara stepped out wearing a tailored suit that cost more than most families earned in a year, her natural hair styled in elegant locks, her bearing that of a woman who had learned to command rooms with silence. Kamsi emerged beside her, 3 years old and striking in his resemblance to a man Obinna would soon recognize. The compound gates hung crooked on rusted hinges. Paint peeled from walls that had once gleamed white. The courtyard where Amara had played as a child was overgrown with weeds pushing through cracked tiles. She didn't knock. The gates were no longer locked, there was nothing left worth stealing. Abel saw her first. The older woman had been sweeping the veranda, a task she once would have delegated to servants. The broom clattered to the ground as recognition dawned, her hands flying to her mouth, tears spilling before she could speak. Amara, she whispered, the name breaking on her lips like prayer. They stood frozen for a moment, 3 years of silence and suffering between them. Then Abel rushed forward, pulling her daughter into an embrace that smelled of poverty and perseverance. You're alive. Oh God, you're alive. Where is he? Amara asked quietly, not returning the embrace but not pulling away either. Abel's face crumpled. Inside. He is not the man you remember. Obinna sat in what had once been his study, surrounded by the remnants of his former glory, empty bookshelves, a desk missing 2 legs, walls bare of the certificates and awards that had proclaimed his success. He had aged a decade in 3 years, his face gaunt, his clothes hanging loose on a frame that had lost both weight and pride. He looked up when Amara entered, and the shock that crossed his face was almost worth the journey. Amara. His voice was hoarse, disbelieving. Father. The word came out cold, formal. His eyes moved to Kamsi, lingering on the child's features with growing recognition that drained what little color remained in his face. The boy. His name is Kamsi. Your grandson. Amara moved deeper into the room, her heels clicking against bare concrete where carpet had once been. I've come to inform you that the property on East Street, the last asset you tried to hide from creditors, has been acquired by my employer. Obinna's face went slack. That land, it's all I have left. Hard. Amara corrected. The transfer is complete. However, my employer is prepared to offer you a settlement, enough to cover your remaining debts and provide modest living expenses. She placed an envelope on the broken desk between them. Consider it an act of mercy, she continued, her voice steady despite the tremor in her chest. Something I learned the hard way, during the 3 years I spent surviving the world you cast me into. Obinna stared at the envelope, his hands trembling too violently to open it. When he finally looked up at his daughter, the question that had haunted him for 3 years emerged as barely a whisper. Who was he? The father. Amara had rehearsed this moment countless times during the drive from Lagos. She had imagined feeling triumph, vindication, the savage satisfaction of watching her father's world shatter completely. But standing in this decaying room, watching a broken man ask for the truth that would destroy him further, she felt only a deep, bone-weary exhaustion. Kwame Bodu, she said quietly. The name hung in the air like poison. Obinna's face went through a progression of emotions, confusion, disbelief, horror, and finally a devastation so complete it seemed to hollow him out from the inside. No. His voice cracked. No, that's not, you said he was the one man I could not forgive. Kwame was your business partner. Your friend. The man you trusted with everything. Amara's voice remained steady, clinical. He came to the house one afternoon when you were at the market. Mama was visiting her sister. I was alone. Ebo, who had followed them into the room, made a sound like something dying. He didn't ask, Papa. He didn't court me or seduce me. He took what he wanted because he could, because I was 17 and terrified, and because men like him believe girls like me exist for their convenience. Obinna's legs gave out. He collapsed into the chair, his face in his hands. I couldn't tell you, Amara continued, each word carefully measured. Because I knew what you would do. You would have confronted him, challenged him, tried to extract justice from a man who saw us all as tools for his enrichment. And he would have destroyed you, which he did anyway, but at least Mama was spared the knowledge of what he'd done to your daughter. I cast you out. Obinna's voice was muffled by his hands, thick with tears. I threw you into the streets carrying his child, and then God help me, I gave him everything. Everything. The irony was too cruel to be coincidental. Kwame hadn't just assaulted Amara, he had circled back years later to complete his violation of the Okafor family, extracting their wealth with the same calculated cruelty he had shown that afternoon. He played you, Papa. Just like he played me. The only difference is I was a child who had no choice, and you were a man blinded by pride and greed. Obinna looked up, his face ravaged. Forgive me. The words came out broken, desperate. Amara, please. I was wrong. About everything. My pride, my cruelty, my blindness to what mattered. I destroyed my own family because I cared more about what others thought than about the truth. Amara looked at her father, this man who had seemed so powerful, so immovable, now reduced to begging in a ruined house. She thought of the girl she had been, the woman she had become, and the price they had both paid for his inability to see beyond his own ego. I forgive you, Papa, she said finally. But forgiveness doesn't undo what was done. We both have to live with that. A story that stays with you. If the price of pride moved you, challenged you, or made you think differently about family, forgiveness, and the consequences of our choices, don't keep it to yourself. Share this story with someone who needs to read it, a friend navigating difficult family dynamics, a parent learning to listen, or anyone who has ever felt cast aside by those who should have protected them. Leave a comment below telling us which moment hit you hardest. Was it Amara's escape from Mama Udo? The revelation of Kwame's betrayal? The final confrontation between father and daughter? Follow for more stories that explore the complexity of African family life, the resilience of women who refuse to be broken, and the difficult path toward redemption. Because some stories aren't just entertainment, they are mirrors that help us see ourselves more clearly, and windows that help us understand others more deeply. What would you have done in Amara's place? What would you have done in Obinna's? The conversation starts now.